Yeah, hi. Yeah, it's starting. Yeah. Yeah, of course, thanks. I will. Okay, talk to you later. Love you too.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. How are you all doing? Thanks so much for your patience and for being here for our beloved City Ballet. My name's Diane Alcott, and I have the pleasure of introducing you to the work that is not almost universally accepted as one of the most profoundly moving dance works ever seen, the 2020 Swan Lake program. So here's to discuss the show's enormous success. Please welcome Program Director Jinhyuk.
Hello.
It's so innovative, and overall it's been so well received, and just so different. What gave you the idea initially?
Well, initially I thought the idea of sprucing things up in Swan Lake was something that was long overdue. I mean, I love the traditional version, but having done it for 6 or 7 years, I was getting a bit bored of it. I kind of wanted it to really feel something and really mean something, so I thought I had to do something quite radical to it. And so the idea of casting a male swan seemed to do that very appropriately. It also there are other reasons obviously, but when I watched swans, I felt that they had a more masculine look to them somehow. They're very strong, their wingspan enormous, they're powerful, but I could play with that.
So you were formerly a principal dancer with multiple Swan Lake roles, if I remember correctly.
That is correct.
Did it ever cross your mind that you would be doing this in the future?
I used to watch Swan Lake a lot before I was even a professional dancer, and I think I used to daydream a lot whenever I was dancing it, and an idea came to me through imagining it, not thinking I would ever have the chance to do it, of what if the Swan Queen was a prince instead. The idea really, for me, that most people probably don't realize is that it was more of a psychological thing that did to the story that really excited me, because it made the swans, rather than being a magical princess who turns into a swan at night and that sort of thing, it became more about an image of a swan being something that the prince could attain to. Something that's missing from his life, and that was the trigger for the story for me, was the having the sex of the swans the same sex as the prince.
And of course open to interpretation by your audience.
Oh, very much. We welcome that.
So you've done a huge change reinterpreting the Swan Prince to the audience, but what about the prince itself?
Yeah, I've had the quite rare opportunity of being able to relook at it every year almost for the last 6 or 7 years, so I felt I've had the chance to, each time it happened, to reassess what I think about it. So the character of the prince is the central character really. It's his story. He takes you right through the piece. He's there from the very beginning to the very end, and it's a story of someone who is very restricted by the life they have to lead, which is that of a royal person. And I think in this day and age there's very few areas of life where you can't be who you want to be if you want it enough. But being royal, I think, is one of those areas where you can't be the person you really are. You have to play a role, and I thought that was a very strong central character. And for him, I'm trying to show someone who needs love in their life in some way, and not necessarily sexual love. It could be just the need to be held almost. He's missing father figures, the fact that he hasn't ever had a love in his life, the whole routine of royal life extremely dull and repetitive. And well, I tried to tell in the pieces throughout Act 1 at least, until we get to the Swan Act, is to tell you as much about this character as possible. So by the time we get to that act, he's a very needy character in many ways.
I like the way you push the boundaries of dance. It seemed to be a good time for just appealing to a wider audience if you'd like.
Well, definitely. In 2018, I got the chance finally to take the company in my hands, which was obviously the turning point of, my career up to that point. There was a lot of trepidation or fear attached to it. Like, would it work? Would the audience take to it? The great thrill was, of course, that they did, and the audiences were some of the best we've ever had. Again, a completely surreal experience for me, having danced to it multiple times as a principal dancer, and now to be in the front row of that audience watching my own work. I remember every second of it now.
And were any of your friends, colleagues, in the city ballet, were they equally skeptical when you said that you were going to push through it?
They were, yeah, and some of them actually still refused to come and watch it because they still thought it was disgusting. And how could somebody do this to Swan Lake? Which, I mean, fair enough if that's the way they're that narrow-minded that they can't even come in. Have a look to see what we've done. I mean, somebody actually came up to me and said, well, what's we're calling it? And I said Swan Lake, of course. And they were like, oh, how can you do that? And it's just ridiculous. But of course, everyone was a bit skeptical at first, but as soon as we started talking about it in details, I knew that they were going to agree with me eventually. We were both keen to keep it very classical to honor what Petipa and Ivanov did, so it's basically the same thing, although with more non-traditional roles.
What changed their minds?
I think it was because of Woosak Kim, who's our Swan Prince, that the whole company stepped up their game. The first run-through that we did, there were drop jaws, because I don't think anyone had really seen anyone dance Swan Lake like he does before. And that was one of my aims, to really push the company, break boundaries and go one step further. Woosak, who's our lead swan, is a dancer that I've had an eye on for quite a while since he arrived at our company. He was working with Boston Ballet in a lot of soloist roles, which obviously intrigued me, but this is the first time he's worked for me, and I found him incredibly charismatic and perfect for the work, and he's fitted into the company beautifully. He's been a fantastic friend throughout the journey, absolutely a dream to work with.
Well, just watching the lead dancers in action does lead us to the point of how people perceive the whole thing. Some people even perceive it as psychological, and I suppose other people might have perceived it as a gay romance. So how did you do with that?
Yeah, well, it's strange because people can't quite imagine what it's going to look like, many images they see or whatever. I think people do take it in many different ways. I mean, there's this prince and the male swan prince, and there is some sort of relationship there that develops, but it can be so many things. It's not, I wouldn't say it wasn't a gay Swan Lake, but I also wouldn't say it was.
I could imagine. Critics were stunned by your interpretations, that it received a standing ovation opening night. That must meant a lot to you.
Yes, there's a sort of there. It feels very significant to me, partly because I feel that the piece has undergone a lot of changes in that time, and so am I. I've got a little older, obviously, in the time since I first danced it, and it's sort of my approach to it now. I think it's a stronger piece. I think it's choreographically tighter. I think it's more heartfelt. It's also for me very significant because it feels much more like seeing a dream come true. It's everything I've ever wanted in my life, so I'm almost more proud of it now to be going with a group of people that I've nurtured and have grown with in other work in my rep and this piece in particular. I've always felt that New York was a great audience for the sort of work that we do, and I'd love to think it might be the opening of more exciting things in the ballet world.
I'm sure it will. It's a huge success. I could sit here and talk to you all night, but we've got schedule to keep. So thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.